The next talk is about BECCS, the big solution that we all try to compete with. So, Peter Cook, the potential contribution of bioenergy and carbon capture and storage to negative emissions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here at this conference. I think it's an important conference. Perhaps a word of comment. I probably will talk a little bit more about carbon capture and storage than I'd anticipated, because I keep hearing it coming up, and I think it might be useful just to briefly talk about that. And as you can see, I actually, my affiliation with the Peter Cook Centre for Carbon Capture and Storage, I did not ask that the centre be called that. I didn't expect the centre would be called that. But the great thing is you don't have to be dead to have something called after you, which is very good. Well, I'll quickly go through one or two of these slides. We don't need to deal with that one. You've seen that one. You've seen that one. And you're all pretty much familiar with that. That's one way of looking at BECCS. I was struck by some of the discussion on terrestrial carbon, because it's interesting that 100 years was regarded as permanent, and I was a little bit surprised at that, to be honest. And I noticed there was a 5% discount on the 100 years as well. We looked at this in the IPCC, looking at CCS, and we were very confident that carbon dioxide stays stored, not for 100 years, but for millions of years. When we were looking at a metric, we said that, well, probably a reasonable metric is to say, how much carbon dioxide do we actually lose in 1,000 years? And we were very, very confident, a high level of confidence in the IPCC, that it would be 1% or less in that 1,000 years. So that's the sort of discount that you'd apply for, perhaps for CCS. So let me be absolutely clear. I'm not saying that BECCS is a silver bullet, nor is CCS a silver bullet. It's part of the rich tapestry of technologies and methodologies that we're going to have to use. No one is better than any other. It's a matter of looking at the circumstances. These are the two components. We've got the bioenergy. As you can see, that's the CO2 source. Then we have to take that carbon dioxide. We have to do several things to it. We have to capture it and separate it from the other gases, and there's various ways you can do this using solvents and membranes and so on. It's not cheap to do that, but you can do it. You then compress it you compress the CO2 to a supercritical state, and depending on the distance to your storage site, you usually put it into a pipeline. You then inject it. So that's the overall sequence of events. And very often you'll hear, well, CCS doesn't work. Well, it does. It's too expensive. You've got to say compared to what? It's not safe. Well, it is. If that's the case, why aren't we doing it? Well, the answer to that is, why would we do it when there's absolutely no reason to do it at the moment? You don't get any more money for electricity that's produced using CCS. There's no drivers in the economy to do it. It's interesting, in the US, they've actually just put forward something called 45Q, under which they're going to start paying $50 a ton for any CO2 that's put into geological reservoirs, and $30 or $35 a ton when it's actually part of an enhanced oil recovery project. So that's the first sort of financial signal we've seen with CCS, and that could change things. So these are just some of the points I think need to be made. So it is globally deployed to the extent there are 21 large-scale projects. By large scale, we're talking about 1 million tons, that sort of thing. Is that enough? Absolutely not. I mean, this is ridiculously small compared to the number that we need. So we need far, far more than that. So I don't want to lull you into a false sense of security. It's a key climate mitigation technology. Part of the problem with CCS has been labeling it as, and the coal lobby was responsible for this, labeling it as clean coal. And one company even wanted to label it as green coal. I mean, it was just ridiculous to label it in that sort of way. You've got to say what it is. You say what the technology is. And that technology is carbon capture and storage. And it's, yes, you can apply it to coal-fired power generation, and it is being done in Canada and the US. But really, it's just a key climate mitigation technology, along with a number of others. But it's the only technology we have for achieving large-scale and secure negative emissions at this time. That doesn't mean to say there won't be others, but at this time, it's the only technology we have for achieving large-scale negative emissions. It's an essential component of direct air capture. Unless you do something like CCS, then you're not going ahead. I mean, as is being done at the moment, you can put it into tomatoes. You can do direct air capture, and that's fine. You can do that. But that's not a long-term mitigation option, putting it into tomatoes. So, you're really in the business of putting it into the subsurface if you really are serious about long-term storage. It's also an essential component of BECCS. This is the range of geological settings that you can actually use for CCS. Now, I'm not going to go into this, but this is out of the IPCC special report. Now, I might just mention in passing that this diagram was actually produced about a kilometre down the road here in Canberra, and it's become something of a classic diagram, just illustrating how we've got a whole range of geological settings. I do not have the time to go into that, but I just briefly have the time to say on this, what do we need? We need high porosity rocks, so we've got the volume there that we can put the CO2 into. We need high permeability rocks, so we can actually inject the CO2 into the rocks. We need a seal above those porous and permeable rocks so the CO2 doesn't escape to the surface. And we inject to a depth of at least 800 meters, because that's where we have supercritical CO2, which means it's dense CO2, it stays in that supercritical state. And it's got density approaching that of water. So we're not talking about a gas once it's down there, we're talking about a fluid, supercritical fluid. These are some of the regions where we could potentially store CO2. That's where we have, that's not to say you can economically do that in these places. All we've done is said the rocks are right for doing this. You've got to have a lot more than just the rocks, of course. But the point I would make here is that maybe in the future, if we're able to make DACs work on a large scale, you could actually perhaps start putting DACs in the areas where the rocks are right, so you don't actually have the cost of transporting the CO2. So, maybe you can change your paradigm if you start doing that sort of a thing. And this sort of thing is a starting point. A number of the sedimentary basins that we've got here are very suitable for geological storage of carbon dioxide. And I just mentioned there in Bass Strait, that's probably one of the best places in the world, actually, for storing carbon dioxide. And there's been recently quite a bit of discussion on the future of hydrogen in Australia. And there is a hydrogen project that's proposed there, along with Kawasaki, and that Alan Finkel, the chief scientist, has been discussing just recently. And that's an entirely feasible, technologically feasible project. We'll see if the economics stack up, but we're saying it's technologically feasible. I don't have time to go into global storage capacity, but it's in the 1,000 to 10,000 gigaton range, certainly in the view of the IPCC. So let me talk a little bit more about the place of BECCS and so on. And I should mention this is work that's been undertaken by a PhD student of mine, Nazim Poor, and she's put together a number of the PowerPoints from here on. So we do actually have a large-scale BECCS project in Illinois. That's based on bioethanol. It's been going now for several years. They're injecting about 1 million tons of CO2 a year into a formation called the St. Peter Sandstone at a depth of about 2,000 meters. So it's going there, it's working there. So we do have proof of concept. I might also mention that Sleipner in the North Sea, they've been injecting and storing CO2 for 20 years now. And that was driven by a price of $45 US on a ton of carbon. And that was very focused carbon pricing. And you can do a lot of things with focused carbon pricing. I'm not a believer in an economy-wide carbon price at this stage to drive particular technologies. I don't think it actually works as well as many people think. That's not to say you shouldn't have carbon pricing. I'm just saying it does not work for this sort of thing at this stage in its development. If you need a $100 carbon price, there's no way you're going to apply that throughout the economy. And maybe you would need one of that sort of price at this stage. So we've currently got a number of other projects that are capturing CO2 as well. So again, we've got the technological base for a lot of this. The range of negative emissions that people have suggested in the literature is up to 20 gigatons a year, and I'm sure there's figures that are more optimistic than that. But if we start looking at BECCS in a sustainable manner, and this is what Nazim's done in her thesis, you have to start looking at things such as what area is available, how is it competing with food, and so on. So she's looked at a number of these things. And she's also not made any assumptions about future biotech developments. Who knows? We may be able to develop something in the future that grows much better in salt marshes or in mangrove swamps. So this is about existing plants, existing technology. Okay? So we're not saying that that's going to hold us up in the future, but that's our starting point. So the area of land that's available is quite modest for crops, for biomass crops, for bioenergy crops. The water need is a major impediment to large-scale bioenergy developments, and that's going to be especially challenging in this part of the world as well. Food competition is a major concern when it comes to bioenergy and CCS. And again, something like getting on for 1 billion people are undernourished or malnourished at this time. So what Nazim did was look at these through the prism of technology, economics, environmental issues, social issues, and policy issues. And I don't have the time to go into all those. But she then homed in on organic waste from municipal, agricultural, and forestry sectors. And there's a number of reasons why she did this, not least because of the fallout from looking at some of the other options that she considered in her evaluation. And also the other point is that if we don't manage residues and waste in a sustainable manner, then they're a major source of greenhouse gas emissions anyway. You can't just leave them in the ground. So can we do something with it? And I think I might quickly zip through a number of these. This is some of the methodology that she was using in what's called the adaptive management system that she was putting the numbers into. And this is the system rather more comprehensively. Sorry. Sorry about this. Based on her calculations, if you looked at landfill gas, which again is seen as a biomass, then, and add CCS, then based on her calculations, you need a REC of about, an REC of about $120 a megawatt hour to be competitive with coal. You need a carbon price of around about $200 a tonne for BECCS for it to become a cheaper option than baseload power. So, in other words, it's quite a long way away from those sorts of numbers, and we have to be realistic at this stage. We don't have the drivers for doing that sort of thing. So again, skipping a number of fairly complex steps, the numbers that she came out with from her assessment are as follows. Based upon municipal waste, forestry residues, and agricultural residues, total sustainable negative emissions globally was 4.8 gigatons of CO2 a year. Of that, municipal waste was around about 2 gigatons, forestry residues about 1.1, and agricultural residues about 1.7. So in other words, it's getting on, if you want a number, then an easy number to remember is 5 gigatons of BECCS, or CO2 a year from BECCS. Now you can get all sorts of other numbers. I'm just offering that to you as the number that she produced through the methodology that she used. So the claim is that we do need to apply things, whether it's the adaptive management system used by Nazim or some other system, so that we can apply a rigor to the evaluation of the BECCS potential based upon sustainability. As a subtext of the global figures she was looking at, the application of BECCS in the energy scene in Australia has a technical potential now of about 25 million tonnes. That's quite an optimistic view. We're not saying that's happening because the price signals aren't there and so on. So there's quite a number of policy steps that would be needed to bring that sort of thing to fruition. Nonetheless, that's the number that she has come up with, about 25 million tonnes. Again, a round number. If we see the sustainable global potential of BECCS is about 5 gigatons a year, so we're a fairly small player in that, but potentially maybe there's an opportunity to show the way there. But certainly supportive policies are essential to encourage BECCS, including appropriate accounting, crediting and pricing of negative emissions, both nationally and internationally. I started off with, in the early part of the thing, talking about CCS as an essential enabler when it comes to BECCS and DACS and so on. And I was at a conference last week, and somebody made the comment, if we're not serious about CCS, we're not serious about achieving 1.5 degrees C. I think I can turn that around and make it a little more positive and say, if we're serious about achieving 1.5 degrees C, then we have to be serious about CCS. That's my story. Thank you.
All right. Questions?
Excellent. Thanks for the talk. One of the things, of course, in the low emissions pathways already in the 2.6 is there's a lot of CCS as part of that. And one of the criticisms I've heard that even to achieve the sort of outstanding targets, we need to be building 5 and 7 CCS plants a week, a huge amount of investment to even stick to what we thought we could do in the past. So the question I have to you is, do we actually have the capability to actually make that kind of investment, to actually get that done in a timely manner? Back to Pep's talk this morning, this is time critical. Are we actually going to be able to realistically bring these online?
Well, you're absolutely correct. I mean, that is a challenge. There's no question. And there's a number of things that stand in the way. One of them is just the capability of pulling the thing together. You could do things on that scale in China. I mean, that's a fact of life. They can make things happen far longer. They can make things happen from start to finish in the time when we're still talking about getting planning approval. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. So it's a matter of how much importance do people want to do with these things. And right now, a concern of mine is that if we're not careful, we're going to over-regulate CCS. And we're seeing that in the United States, where greater rigor is being applied to people putting CO2 in the ground than people putting natural gas in the ground or putting it up in the air. And so if we're not careful, we're actually going to potentially stymie something that is part of the solution, not all the solution. So you're quite right. Can we do it? Well, I think it gets to the stage where you say, if we have to do it, then we have to do it. We do have the capabilities to do this, but it needs the capabilities of Manhattan projects, not the capabilities of cottage industry. Do we have that? Yes, we can, if the right drivers are there.
Great. I think we're going to have to move on, sorry. All right, thanks very much. Yeah.